April, we were just chatting before we started about the things we wished we could tell our younger self. There's so much, but what would be that one piece of advice that you would give the younger you if you could go back? Like, not only what would you tell her, but what do you think would actually like resonate with her? Like what would she listen to? Because I remember myself early on in my career in my 20s, and I had a little bit of I can do this on my own, a little chip on my shoulder. Mm-hmm. So I always think about what I would tell myself, and I might tell myself to get over myself and listen to people more.
Well, that's amazing, because I was actually going to say, I really have two things that I think about quite often. And the first one for me is that I have always had a really strong intuition. And so I wish that earlier on I had have been confident in my gut and my intuition about things. I tend to read people really well and situations really well. And I kind of jump to solutions very quickly, and that's helpful. But I didn't always have confidence in that or in myself. So I didn't always raise my hand, raise my voice, or speak up. And if I had, I think that earlier in my career, I could have made bigger contributions, greater value contributions. It probably would have taken me a little farther, a little faster. But that self-doubt always crept in a little bit for me. It was a confidence issue. And then the second thing I think I learned from a mentor years ago, and it truly has been pivotal for me: ask more questions than you speak and provide input. And one of the things that same mentor taught me was what else might be true. Sometimes we are going off of just a small glimmer of information, but we tend to, in our heads, think that we know it all. But if we ask more questions, we can find so many more nuances to the situation that then we can respond to and address holistically and be more successful by doing that. So ask a lot of questions and be more confident.
I love that. Ask more questions. I'm really curious by nature, but there are times that I jump to conclusions, or I jump to the end before I've asked all the relevant questions. And I think if we ask the right questions, it helps to build our confidence in the solution that we're going to propose.
Agreed, totally. It also can clear up any false perceptions we have that comes from an emotional state. You know, sometimes we think someone is upset, or we think that someone is not on our side when we're trying to propose something, but we don't have all of the information. And if we ask more questions, we can find out really what's going on. So,
wow, that's really good. How many times has an email come across, or even a text message, and the tone of it doesn't translate? I mean, I think people have talked about this for years, right? It doesn't translate in email. It doesn't translate, in written word all the time. And so you think that the person's not on your side, or you're drawing a conclusion that really, if you just ask a couple questions. I know there's been times where, I was kind of taken back by an email, and had I just left it, I would have gotten my feelings hurt, which, they say, in business, don't let your emotions in it. But at the end of the day, we all know that you can't separate. Yeah, you really can't separate all of your experiences you bring to the workplace. And so if you are, if you are, in my case, wounded, I was super wounded, and hadn't really went through the healing process or counseling. So I was drawing conclusions that if I just asked some questions, and there were times where, I followed up and asked some questions, and it was completely different than what I thought. And it really, that really made a difference later on. I can see that was pivotal in my career also, where I learned to ask some questions and get clarity, and not jump to conclusions or jump to assumptions.
Same. I also learned when asking those questions, to ask the question and then be silent. And that's difficult for me because I am, I'm an outgoing, outspoken person. I'm definitely like an A personality driver, and so extroverted. So I tend to be the one that jumps in and over talks. And I did, learn somewhere along the path that if I will ask a question and then be silent and be comfortable with letting there be sort of an uncomfortable silence for a little while, sometimes people give you the pat answer that they think they should give right away, but there's more underlying it. And if you just sit there for a few seconds and let the silence get a little uncomfortable, they start talking again and they give you more and more. And I'll tell you where that was most valuable after I learned that in my career. That was really helpful with the kids.
Okay. Yes. Well, so you brought up kids. So I have a question for you, because I talked to a lot of people leading up to this interview, and there's a lot of women that are early in their career. They're not married, but they have a dream of, they do want to get married. They do want to have kids. And they're at this point where they're trying to figure out how much planning they put into that family planning in their, like, at the early stages of their career. Like, how much am I supposed to think about this? How much am I supposed to plan this? Can you talk about that a little bit?
You bet. I mean, for me, my life kind of unfolded unplanned. I was surprised. I was not supposed to be able to get pregnant. Had a lot of health issues on the way, and God blessed me, and suddenly I was pregnant and had a healthy pregnancy, and my son was the best surprise gift of my life. But for me, that happened at a time when I was really growing my career, and I was wanting to become a higher level people leader. I was really energetic and focused at work, and committed and loyal and hardworking, all of those things that we all are. And I knew that I wanted more in my career. I knew that I wanted to achieve higher level people leader positions. And what was difficult for me, I think, is if I look back, I wish in the early days, I sacrificed a lot of time with my son when he was little for my career, and I thought that was required of me. And now that I'm older and more mature, and I look back and I kind of look at it from a different frame of reference, I think that I committed to my job and my career, and I missed out on some really precious time when my son was little. They don't stay young for long, and you never know when that last moment that they're going to climb in your lap for the very last time is. And if I could go back, I would rebalance myself a little bit. I think that I had a false perception that I had to give 110% of myself towards my career to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And I honestly don't think that was true. I think that other people have children, and other working parents are in the workplace. And I think that they would have understood if I had have backed off just a little bit and focused just as much on my family as I did on my career.
Wow, that's really good advice. Same. I definitely feel like I didn't think that I had a choice.
Yeah.
There was this perception that if I was going to provide and accelerate my career, the only choice was to be in the office.
Right. And isn't it great that times are changing too, right? Like there's so much more in terms of parental leave rights for both fathers and mothers, and support for work-life balance, and the ability to work remote. I mean, times are definitely different than they were back then, but at the same time, I do think that I had some great leaders that I reported to, and I think that I expected more of myself than they ever expected. And so I wish that I could go back and rebalance that, but you can't go back. You can only move forward.
That's right. It's easy to look back. I had a coach that used to tell me hindsight's 20/20, right? It's really easy to look back and say, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And I was doing some research leading up to this, And I don't remember the statistic. I'll put it in the notes in the chat or in the video description once this post. But there was a description, some information, a stat about how less men like hang on to their past versus women. Like we seem to overanalyze like every decision that we've made in our past, and men have, for whatever reason, seem to be able to just move on to the next decision, right? And we're sitting here still thinking about 10 decisions ago. I know I recently was back in the town I graduated high school from, and I reconnected with a high school friend, one of my best friends in high school. And I was talking to her about and apologizing for, there were times I wasn't a really good friend to you. And she was like, are you seriously thinking about that? Like that was so long ago. Why are you hanging on to that? Like you need to let that go. And I thought, I'm hanging on to a lot of decisions that I made and other people have moved on from them. Not to say that you don't apologize when you've done something wrong, or I think there's gestures that you do there, but there's certainly something about us hanging on to it longer at times.
Yeah. I went through an exercise a couple of years ago that I thought was so valuable. I had a great mentor coach who led me through an exercise of writing down my beliefs. And it took some work to get there because, when you start an exercise like that, you kind of just are at a loss for words. But, our past experiences caused us to have some beliefs about ourselves, about others, about the world. And if you can really start to figure out what your beliefs are and look back at your past and figure out where that belief came from some kind of an experience you had in the past. And so for me, that belief of I have to give 110% and I can't show weakness in being a mother or in having to leave work suddenly to go for my child, I have to be careful about that perception. That belief came from somewhere. And so what happened earlier in my experiences that led me to think that was the truth. And really, when you can start looking back at where those beliefs came from, you can kind of unwind it. But I agree, I'm the same way. I still hold on to things, and think about the past. And I think too, women don't tend to forgive ourselves as easily as other people in our lives forgive us. We need to learn to let ourselves make mistakes and to move on from those mistakes. Those mistakes don't define us, or quite the opposite. Some of those mistakes, maybe they do define us, because I look back in my life and the biggest mistakes I made are where I then had the most growth and future success from, because I shifted. The mistake caused enough pain to cause me to make a big change, which put me into a better place. And so that's another thing that as a younger person, I was always so afraid to make big mistakes. And now I look back and I cherish some of the mistakes that I made, because like I said, they catapulted me.
Wow, that's good. That's really good advice. I think all of us could sit back and say those times of deep pain certainly brought about a growth that probably wouldn't have happened. I would like to think I wouldn't have made as bad of mistakes, maybe. I don't know, I made some pretty bad mistakes. But I think the key is when you make them, learn from them. Like you can't go back and change it. So at least if you do make a decision that this was not a good decision. Actually, I think you should do this across the board, but certainly with decisions that maybe hurt people, hurt yourself, right. Evaluating them and saying, okay, in this situation, what would I do differently next time?
Right.
And I love that you talked about beliefs. I have went through similar exercises. In fact, I remind myself of, on a daily basis, typically in the morning, I go through an exercise of reminding myself and affirming myself, because in order to reprogram your mind, it's going to take a long time. Like it took you 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years to get where you are. And all of those experiences programmed your mind. It's going to take you longer than a month or a week or a year to reprogram. You have to, it's a process, and you have to trust that process. And I think sometimes we give up too early because we're not seeing the results as quickly as what we would like to.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
So I want to be mindful of time. So we're right at time. One thing I want to just tell you is, it's funny that you talked about in the beginning about not kind of trusting your instinct and trusting your gut and having a voice, because I think that sometimes we don't see ourselves as other people see us.
That's
so
right.
When I met you early in our careers, one of the reasons why I admired you so much was your ability, I felt, to really be present and speak up. Like, I felt like there were times where I definitely didn't have a voice. Like, I didn't know how to share a voice. I felt silent. And I saw you speak up and share and make decisions that impacted people. And I just admired you doing that. So you didn't see it in yourself maybe at that time. Like, you can look back and go, I could have done this more. But I want to tell you that it was definitely you doing that, you speaking up, you having a voice, you making some decisions that I've admired all of these years.
Well, that's great. I mean, I can say so much the same about you. I remember you just being a spitfire. And what I remember the most is I admired so much your ability to really dig in to a process and break that process apart and map it out and document it out. And then when other people got together, like, you had the whole project plan and the process all mapped out and documented. And that skill was so needed at that time. It was fantastic. So same, and I wish we could go back to those days and go have a margarita one night and
right?
chat.